There's another club in for Eberechi Eze. Rodrigo could be Premier League bound too. What are Arsenal likely to do between now and the end of the window, if anything at all? We're going to talk transfers and loads more on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Thanks for being with us. Hey everybody, how are we doing? Happy Tuesday and welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host Harry Symeou. Got my morning coffee ready to go. Looking forward to another brilliant show in your company. Yeah, there's quite a bit to kind of unpack this morning. I sort of sat down around about 8-9 p.m. last night and thought, what are we going to talk about on tomorrow's podcast? What are we going to do? And I decided that I'm going to start pulling together my kind of Premier League predictions, not just from an Arsenal perspective, but from a kind of wider perspective. So what we were going to do was talk about Arsenal first and foremost. We were going to talk, who's going to be player of the year, top goal scorer, etc., breakout player, surprise package, etc., all that type of thing. We will do that. I promise you. We're going to do that on Wednesday now because there's quite a bit of transfer news doing the rounds at the moment. Now, these windows, they do tend to hot up, don't they, as they get towards the kind of back end. The season is just a few days away. Liverpool and Bournemouth kick it off on Friday night. Of course, Arsenal get their first taste of Premier League action for the new season on Sunday at Old Trafford. So we've still got a few days. We know that transfers happen after the season starts. The window runs until the 1st of September. Talked about this before. I don't personally think that's right. I think it's unfair. The fact that there's still so much uncertainty for managers and players to deal with once the season's begun. I would prefer that the window just slammed shut when the season started, and that was that. But that's not the way it works at the moment. So there's going to be plenty of transfer talk and plenty more drama, I'm sure, to unfold over the next couple of weeks and beyond that as well. So, yeah, I figured today we should focus on some of the transfer stories that are doing the rounds because they might not directly impact Arsenal, but they certainly do impact the opinion around Arsenal. They certainly do have an effect on our fan base. All you need to do is scroll through social media for 5 minutes to really kind of understand what this latest news has done to many Arsenal fans in terms of where they're at, in terms of their headspace. And that comes from having an expectation. And we've talked a lot, haven't we, throughout the window about Eberechi Eze. We've talked a lot about why he would be a great addition to this Arsenal side. I've talked about it at length to the point where I probably fell into the trap at some stages of talking about him as if he was already an Arsenal player. Well, that isn't the case. He remains a Crystal Palace player. He's been playing for Crystal Palace throughout pre-season. He took part in the Community Shield final for Crystal Palace at the weekend. And, you know, we've been saying for a good week now that this is probably not as advanced as some people would have had you believe. I did read a couple of reports online yesterday from people saying, nope, it's done. Terms are agreed, not just personal terms, but club-to-club terms as well. And then we wake up to some news from Fabrizio Romano in which he claims that now Tottenham are very much in talks with Crystal Palace over the potential signing of Eberechi Eze. Look, I've said this before, okay? If Arsenal really, really, really wanted Eberechi Eze, forget what we as fans want, right? Because as fans, we want him. The vast majority of us want him. The vast majority of us believe that he'd be a real good fit. I know there are a lot of you out there that have a concern around where exactly he'll fit into the team. We keep talking about the left wing. He's not really a left winger, is he? He's kind of more of a sort of central player that can drift out to the left-hand side and probably can start there. But the question that some of you have had, and rightly so, is how well would he play that kind of out-and-out left role? And would he just drift into a kind of crowd scene for us? And would we then lack the width that we need? I understand that, right? I understand that. I understand that concern. I felt like you could justify the big spend, you know, even if we were to meet the total of £68 million at 60 plus 8 in terms of how that release clause works. I always felt like we could kind of make that work if we really wanted him, and we could justify it because of the fact that he can play in multiple positions. So, you know, I felt that this was a deal that Arsenal would probably do. I felt like Arsenal were biding their time. I felt like Arsenal were waiting for this release clause to expire, but then I've never really been 100% confident on when that expiry date is, because some people reported that it was the 1st of August. Others are telling us it's the 15th of August. You just don't know, right? And we'll get onto this story in a minute, because I think there's quite a lot to unpack from this. We're also going to talk a little bit about the potential departures. Where are we at with some of those? We're also going to talk about Rodrygo, a player that, again, a lot of us really, really liked early on in the window. I think we've kind of made our peace with the Rodrygo thing. At least I know I have. I've realized, I realized a while ago that he wasn't going to come to Arsenal. So I kind of started to focus my attentions and my want elsewhere. I would be frustrated, though, if he did come to the Premier League and join the rival, because I think he's a really, really good player and he has the potential to elevate any team that he goes into. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about, as I said, some of the departures as well. So lots and lots to get into on this morning's pod. But before we dive into the bulk of the content, if you haven't done so already, I'd really, really appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're very, very close to that milestone of 45,000 subs. That's where we wanted to get by the start of the season. We're a few days out. With a real big push, we could potentially do it and get over the line. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're a regular here, you know what you're going to get in terms of content. So just like the video already. Let's dive into today's subjects in a lot more depth and in a lot more detail then, without further ado. Okay, let's start off with some of the departures. I said to you guys that I was planning for a slightly different pod this morning, and we've ended up kind of pivoting back to transfers. That's because I forgot it's Tuesday. And the great thing about Tuesdays is that we wake up to the Athletics transfer deal sheet, which often provides a good bit of insight and a nice sort of broad picture of what's going on at the football club with regards to transfers, whether that be incomings, outgoings, etc., etc. We keep hearing that Arsenal are focused on outgoings at the moment. Vieira, Hein, Lokonga, and Nelson, according to this piece, are all available to leave the club before the deadline. Zinchenko is also available for sale, although the player is said to be considering running down his contract and leaving for free in 2026. Now, if I am Alexander Zinchenko, that is absolutely 100% what I'm doing. He's on a good salary at Arsenal. He will then have the freedom to choose where he goes, because he'll be a free agent, which makes him, by default, appeal to a lot more football clubs. He'll also be able to command a signing on fee, which goes straight into his pocket rather than into Arsenal's pocket. And, you know, we've said for a while that players will, depending on the circumstances, at times prefer to do that. For Arsenal, of course, we prefer a sale. Who wouldn't? Why wouldn't we want to get some money in for a player that we invested north of £30 million on, but also a player that's been on a pretty big salary at Arsenal? Now, some people have sort of suggested, when I've kind of read online stuff this morning, that we made a mistake signing Zinchenko. We paid him too much money. We've done the same thing with Gabby Jesus, etc., etc. Let me just say this, okay? That, for me, is complete and utter nonsense. And it is revisionism at its finest, okay? At the end of the day, nobody can deny the impact that Zinny and Jesus had when they come in at Arsenal. Arsenal elevated from a team that couldn't get into the top four to a team that were challenging for the Premier League title within a season, because we brought those, within a summer, because we brought those guys in. They played a massive, massive role in that. They don't deserve to be disrespected. And at the time, it made sense, and it was a good investment, and it was an investment that elevated the level of the team, as I say, like that. So the revisionism now, people going, oh, well, you know, what a stupid decision that was, blah, 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 blah. Zinchenko has been the victim of Arsenal's evolution and the fact that they've gone down a slightly different route. And Gabby Jesus has just been riddled with injuries, which nobody could have seen coming, because his injury record prior to joining Arsenal was nowhere near the point where it would have been alarming. So, yeah, I think people that are sort of looking back and going, oh, what a stupid decision that was. It's easy to say that with hindsight. At the time, those signings were exciting. And at the time, those signings did what they were supposed to do, which was elevate the level at Arsenal very, very quickly. The bit that surprised me a little bit in this was that there was a line about Jakub Kivior. Now, I don't think it's a secret that Jakub Kivior wants to play every single week. He's too good a player to be a bit part player. Okay, I understand that, but it depends on your kind of your mindset, and it depends on your kind of viewpoint. I think as a footballer, would you rather be a bit part in something special potentially, or a massive part in something that's a bit meh? Like, he could go to a middle of the road club and be a starter and play every single week, but is he going to have a greater chance of achieving the big things in the game? And the answer to that is probably no. But some players don't look at it like that. Some people look at it from a kind of individual perspective. I want to play week in, week out. I want to be a regular starter, blah, 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 blah. Others look at it and go, well, look at where I am. I'm at one of the biggest football clubs in the world. I might not be a starter week in, week out, but I certainly have a role to play in this group, and I stand a chance of achieving brilliant things here. If I was Jakub Kivior, I don't think I'd be desperate for a move out of Arsenal. I don't think he is. This line says that Kivior is open, which doesn't mean that he's begging for it. He's open to leaving for a club where he can be a regular starter, but I'd imagine that it depends on who that club is. And Arsenal are in no rush to sell him. They haven't seen their valuation met yet. There has been interest in him. Obviously, we've heard of that Porto interest. People saying that, he was right to turn that down. I think I agree with them. The Arsenal were right to turn that down as well. I think I agree with them too. Going to Porto wouldn't really appeal to me. If you're telling me he's going to go to Inter or to Juve or something like that, then I think that's something different. And I would probably consider my options if I was him. But Porto's offer was an initial loan with an obligation of something like 25 million euros at the end of it, which isn't going to appeal to Arsenal. Like you've got to. Arsenal are going to lose an important squad player, and people argue they got Mosquera in now and all the rest of it. But Kivior's an important part of the group, and so if you're going to let him go, it's got to be a deal that makes sense. Now, we talked a few days ago, now probably a week or so ago, about why Arsenal seem to be bad sellers in comparison to some of their rivals and some of their peers. And I do think it's because sometimes we hold on to players just that little bit too long. But in this instance, where the offer doesn't make sense, I can completely understand Arsenal's stance on this. Meet the valuation and we'll talk about it. Don't meet the valuation and there's not a conversation to be had. Because the difference between, keeping Jakub Kivior and letting him go, that difference is going to be made by money, ultimately. Because as you say, and as I've been saying, he's not going to be in the best 11, if you like, when everybody's fit and available. But I honestly do think that for us to take that next step as a team and as a club, we do have to be more open to rotation. I do believe that there is a lot more confidence around Jakub Kivior as an option than there was 6, 8, 12 months ago. And so for that reason, if I was him, I'd give it one more go. I'd wait and see how this season plans out before making any kind of rash decisions. But again, just to reiterate what the Athletic are reporting, they're not saying that Jakub Kivior's kicking the manager's door down and demanding that he be sold. They're simply saying that he's open to a move. Arsenal are open as well by the looks of it, but they need their valuation to be met. And if it's not, then there's no conversation to be had and he will remain an Arsenal player. Arsenal then are talked about in the context of new signings. What is it that Arsenal could still be looking to do? Now, I'm starting to think that there might not be any more major signings. And it's not an opinion that has just kind of popped into my head this morning. It's one that I've had actually for probably the best part of a week. I talked to you guys on Thursday or Friday about what we'd kind of been hearing about Eberechi Eze, and it wasn't my information. It wasn't reported by me, but there was a lot of reports out there from people saying, this might not be as advanced as people believe, and don't get caught up on the hype train. And I've certainly been guilty of that, right? There's no question about it. But at that point, I started to question whether Arsenal would make another major signing. 6 players signed, best part of a couple of £100 million spent. I still think that we need one more. This is not me flip-flopping. I get accused a lot. It's funny because sometimes I get accused of defending the club and being the PR man. at points during this preseason, I've been accused of spreading toxic negativity. So, it just goes to show that you can't please everyone, and that each and every person will interpret what you say in a completely different way, because I don't know how you can possibly be at both ends of the spectrum. But I guess my point here is I've started to wonder for a while if we are going to make another major signing between now and the end of the window. And I keep hearing people say, yeah, but it depends on the market, market opportunities, blah, 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 blah. Hold on. Either you want another attacker, in which case you go out and get one. And I believe that we need one. I believe it would be naive to overlook the fact that we're still short in that area. It would be rolling the dice and gambling on the likes of Martinelli and Trossard and Odegaard as well, to a point, although I'm less worried about Odegaard in terms of the bigger picture. But you are gambling on some of those players kind of rediscovering their best. And after a season last season, particularly in Martinelli's case, I would argue, where he was nowhere near his best, what makes people so confident that he is going to step it back up again? I don't mean it to be, let's pick on Gabriel Martinelli, because I don't in any way think he's a bad player. I think he's a really useful player, and he's got a lot of brilliant attributes. But when you get to that top level and you want to get over the line and you want to win the game's biggest trophies, we've said this before, nobody's going to be satisfied with just a Carabao Cup. Nobody's going to be satisfied with just an FA Cup. Why? Because this project has been built to win the very biggest prizes in the game. And we're talking about Premier Leagues and we're talking about Champions Leagues. If you go well in the Premier League and you win a cup, that's great. If you go well in the Champions League and you win a cup, that's fantastic too. But the cups alone, okay, for some people, they would kind of be like, well, that's the first step. We've won a bit of silverware with this group. Now we're going to kick on and now we're going to push on. That's the patient people. But there'll be a lot of people that will go, well, that's not good enough. We've spent all this money. We're supposed to be winning the big ones, not those, with all due respect to those competitions. So I think for me, when you've built something to kind of go to the top, you're well within your rights to demand the very, very best in every area of the pitch. And I just don't think on the left wing right now, we have the very, very best out there, or even close to it. So, yeah, we're going to have to wait and see whether Arsenal do any more business on that side. But if Arsenal are to make another addition, this is what the Athletic are reporting. This was the line they put in this morning's transfer deal sheet. If Arsenal are to make another addition, it is likely to be in the attacking part of the pitch. Arsenal have been studying candidates to improve their left wing options, but ideally the club would like to make some sales before prioritizing another arrival. This thing about making sales, okay? I understand that we need to clear the decks. I understand that we have a limit with regards to how many players we can have. I understand that we have a wage structure that needs to be maintained. I understand that Arsenal do need to move on players in this window. But I've always said that when you're trying to move on players for whom there isn't that much demand, the likelihood is that those deals are going to develop and turn into something the later you get into the window. Because that's the way it works. If you're looking at a Zinchenko, or you're looking at a Reece Nelson, or a Lokonga, or a Vieira, you're not going to go early. You're going to enter these negotiations later on in the window, because you know that Arsenal's need and the urgency to sell becomes greater. And in that situation, as a buying club, you are much more likely to strike up a deal that, is favorable to you. Also, if you are one of those clubs that are going, well, let's sign him on loan initially with an option to buy. Let's sign him on loan with an obligation to buy, or whatever, because you want to kick the can down the road, because financially for you, that makes sense. Again, Arsenal are more likely to entertain and listen to those offers when their options are limited, and their options will be far more limited in their eyes when they get to the back end of the window. If Arsenal really, 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 really do want Eberechi Eze, they can make it happen. And then you have to back yourselves. You have to back yourselves in that you will then oversee the departures that you need to. That's why we went out and bought one of the best sporting directors in the game in. All right, you have to back yourselves to a point. The problem with the Eberechi Eze situation is that, yes, I've said it before, Arsenal probably wait until a little bit later on in the window, maybe waiting for this release clause everybody keeps talking about to expire, hoping to negotiate down with Crystal Palace. But now we've got a problem, because there is another club really and truly in the mix. And that's Tottenham. Tottenham are trying for Eze. They're also trying for Savinho from Manchester City. And that is in response to losing, obviously, James Maddison. He's got a long-term injury. They've lost Heung-min Son as well. And Fabrizio Romano's reported that Eze is keen on the deal, but the deal depends on Crystal Palace now because the release clause has expired. That's one angle of it. If you read Ed Aarons' piece, he says that Spurs have opened talks over a move. However, they do not intend to meet the £68 million release clause, which expires on Friday. He then goes on to say a further complication is that Arsenal are believed to be Eze's favoured destination should he leave Palace. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. There's two reports from two people who are very, very good at their jobs and very, very trustworthy. But they're both giving us different information. So this is why when you hear this stuff, you kind of got to reserve judgment just for a bit until we kind of understand what the picture looks like. Tottenham are trying for Eze. Eze's keen, according to Fabrizio Romano. Well, Eberechi Eze, let me tell you this, would not be keen on a move to Tottenham if he thought that there was a realistic chance of him joining Arsenal. Maybe he's at the point where he feels that he wants to move on from Crystal Palace. Maybe he is open to joining Tottenham if Arsenal aren't in the mix, but Arsenal will be his first choice. There's no doubt about that. Okay, Arsenal will be his first choice. The only thing Tottenham can offer Eberechi Eze that Arsenal can't is a guaranteed starting place in the 11 week in, week out. That's the only difference for me. I suppose they are in the Champions League. He gets to stay in London. He gets to play in that shiny new stadium, etc., etc. So Tottenham does appeal. I understand that. I do. But there's no way that he's going to choose Tottenham over Arsenal if Arsenal is seriously in. So this speaks to what we've been discussing over the past week, which is that Arsenal can't be as in for Eberechi Eze as we've all been led to believe. Because if they were, this Tottenham thing wouldn't be a thing. So I'm starting to question now whether Arsenal are actually serious about Eberechi Eze, or if Arsenal are sort of satisfied with the business that they've done already, are looking at the business that they've done, pretty pleased with themselves, patting themselves on the back and saying, if an opportunity presents itself to go and get an Eze or someone like that and everything works out, then we're there. But if it's something that we got to push and stretch to do, maybe we won't do it. But again, this release clause thing is significant because I've always said that I think Arsenal will want to pay less than the release clause. And I think that Arsenal would prefer to wait to a point where there is a scope to negotiate down. So did this release clause expire, as Fabrizio Romano said? Has it expired already? Or is it going to expire on Friday, as Ed Aarons says? I don't know. And that's why I'm a little bit confused. I don't want to overreact because I don't understand the kind of ins and outs of this situation because there's so much contradictory information out there. But having said that, I can understand why there's a lot of Arsenal fans that have their hearts set on Eberechi Eze that woke up this morning, read that Tottenham are in discussions, read the words "he is keen" from Fabrizio Romano, and have lost their heads. Like, I get it. I get it. The truth is we don't really know how the land lays around Eberechi Eze at the moment, but he's a player that I would love us to have. He's a player that I think would add lots of what is needed at Arsenal, which is flair, dribbling ability, creativity, spark, goal threat. I think he'd be a really, really great addition to the group. How exactly the kind of semantics of him fitting into the team work, I'm not entirely sure at the moment, but I just don't think you can ever have too many good players. And so, you know, obviously my preference is that he comes in, but also, you know, if I'm talking about the midfield being slightly rejigged and rebalanced and all the rest of it, and I'm talking about it being a system with 110 really, and then you've got Odegaard and you've got Ranieri and you've got Dauman and you've got Havertz as well, who, you know, whether you think he can do that role or not, I'm sure Mikel Arteta does. You'd start to question whether Arsenal really need to go and do this bit of business. I get it, but sometimes you need to go beyond. Sometimes you need to do more than just the minimum required. Arsenal would argue that they've done way more than the minimum required because they've gone and got Zubimendi and they've gone and got Gyökeres and they've spent big money on Noni Madueke, etc., etc. But as Daryl says in the chat, it's just the kind of optics, isn't it, of seemingly losing out on a player to Spurs. This is it, though, right? Did we lose out? If Eberechi Eze ends up joining Tottenham, will it be because we lost out on Eberechi Eze and we missed out, or will it be because Arsenal were never as interested as we ever thought they were? The answer is probably the latter. Arsenal, given where they are today, given the way we pay versus what Spurs pay and all the rest of it, Arsenal wouldn't lose out to Spurs on a player that they really, really want. So my conclusion to all of this Eberechi Eze chat today is don't question why we're potentially losing out to Tottenham. Question whether Arsenal were really that serious about Eberechi Eze in the first place. I've fallen into the trap. Lots of other people have fallen into the trap over the course of this summer. And that is a trap that we've fallen into because we've been tempted by the kind of quality of the player and the star quality and what he would bring to the table. But we haven't been usurped by Tottenham. We haven't been pipped to the post by Tottenham. No. We clearly aren't as in or as interested for this player, I should say, as Tottenham Hotspur are currently. And Tottenham's situation is desperate. Tottenham's situation is desperate because they've lost Maddison, they've lost Son, they're trying to get Savinho in from Man City, and they're trying to add Eze. Let me tell you this. If they get Savinho and Eze in, those are two really, really good signings, and they'd have equipped Thomas Frank, I think, to go on and do really, really good things at the club. I like him as a manager. I think he'll do well. I hope he doesn't because of who he's managing, but yeah. Look, Rumble says, what did he say? Something about copium. He says, me saying that, we haven't been pipped to the post by Tottenham. In fact, you have to question whether Arsenal was seriously in. He says, that's copium, Harry. It's facts. Arsenal have been interested in Eze. What do you mean it's facts? Like, because it's been reported by journalists that Arsenal like the player doesn't mean that Arsenal are willing to meet the £68 million release clause or get near that price point. Nobody has ever reported that Arsenal have, progressed really kind of well with Crystal Palace in this Eberechi Eze thing. None of the Ornsteins or Romanos have said, yeah, Arsenal have sort of opened official talks with Crystal Palace. We haven't heard that stuff. So why is it facts? Why are certain things dressed up as facts and others sort of dismissed as speculation? What's the differentiator? Clearly, it's who it's been reported by, right? I'd imagine. And in a lot of cases, there's people that are sort of clutching at the fact that no. And then he goes on to say, look, it's clearly facts. You've been talking about it for months. Now, because we look like we're going to lose him, you're now making up the club aren't interested. No, I've been talking about him for months as one of my preferences. I've talked about him for months as someone that I'd really, really like to see come in at the club. And that hasn't changed. But I'm not making an excuse. I'm trying to figure out how we've got to this situation where he looks like he could be being the key term there, Tottenham bound. And I'm trying to figure out what must have happened. If I had to guess, I would say that Arsenal aren't willing to meet Crystal Palace's demands. Tottenham are willing to get closer to that or have at least open talks. You never know. Tottenham might end up having a conversation with Crystal Palace and saying, we don't want to pay that either and walking away too. You just don't know at this stage. We're trying to read between the lines. We're trying to figure out why it is that Tottenham seem to be, front runners at this moment in time. It's not excuse making or anything else. It's just not like this term copium. Like, where does such an online term that just gets thrown around? It's a bit silly, really. Anyway, Justice says, I love this channel, but nah, bro, I feel like you've been making so many excuses for Arteta in this club. If we're going into this season with this group of players, then we are not a serious club. How many times have I been told that I've been negative this summer? Now I'm making excuses for Arteta and the club. I've given you my honest, unfiltered opinions on what I think needed to be done going into the summer, on how I felt around some of the signings that we've made, And I would really, 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 really like Eberechi Eze. I'm not making an excuse in saying that it's fair now to question how serious the club's interest ever was in Eberechi Eze, because there's no way Tottenham beat us. Like, in what way did Tottenham beat us? We're in the Champions League. They're in the Champions League. Okay. We're in North London. They're in North London. Okay. We are, much better payers in terms of wages and salaries. We are definitely capable of paying similar transfer fees to them, if not more. We've spent a lot of money already this summer. My view is that if Arsenal really want this player, and Arsenal really believed he was the answer, then they could find a way of financing this ahead of moving some of these players on. Because we're all in agreement that Vieira, Hein, Lokonga, Nelson, these guys are more than likely to leave between now and the end of the window. What we get for them remains unclear, and we're going to have to negotiate deals, of course. But they're all going to go. Come on, they're not going to stick around and do nothing. We'll get to the end of the window. Some of them might end up leaving on loan again, which isn't ideal for us, but they will be out of the door in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I'm not melting down because I can't believe that Tottenham would beat us in a race for a player like Eberechi Eze unless they were more keen than we are. It's the only thing I can think of. Right, short pause. When we come back, we're going to talk about another player that Arsenal have been heavily linked with throughout the summer window that also appears to be Premier League bound but isn't coming to the Emirates.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, Harry Symeou. Like and subscribe. If you haven't done so already, please do. It really, really does help. All you got to do is click on the like button, not in the chat, by the way, but on the video page. That's what I'm after. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Help us as we creep towards that 45,000 subscriber mark that we want to get to by the time the season starts. That's the target. That's the ambition. It's been the target for quite some time. We're not a million miles away. We're about, we were less than 150 subscribers away from it when we started today's live stream. So get involved. If you're listening on Apple, leave us a review. If you're listening on Spotify, leave us a review. If you prefer to go one further and become a patron, you can do so. Patreon.com/Chronicles of a Gooner. The link is in the description below. Check it out. Okay, let's talk Rodrigo, shall we? Rodrigo is now being heavily linked with a move to Manchester City. They're about to let Savinho join Tottenham by the looks of things. Said that the player is interested in that move as well. They're looking at a deal circa sort of £50 million. And also Manchester City have also let Jack Grealish go. He's joined Everton on loan, which opens up a space for the Real Madrid star. If you've got Savinho's salary off your books and you're getting Jack Grealish's salary covered by Everton, which is what I was reading yesterday, or at least the vast majority of it, then that frees up the funds for Manchester City to bring in Rodrygo from Real Madrid. He's a top player. No getting away from that. I've always rated him, always liked him. At the beginning of the window, I really did have my heart set on him. We were kind of teased, weren't we, ahead of that Real Madrid tie about him being a potential target this summer. Never really felt, though, at any point in the summer that it was likely. And that's kind of continued to be the case. Looks like he could be on his way to Manchester City. And if they get him, it's a really, really good signing. And this will contribute to the noise around Arsenal, right? There'll be people out there going, we didn't get Eze, we didn't get Rodrigo. And then when they watch Trossard or Martinelli miss a chance or fail to impact on a game next season, if that is to be the case, they'll go, Rodrigo went to Man City, Eze went to Spurs, we're not a serious club, etc., etc., etc. I understand the frustration. I do. I understand the frustration because they're both top players and we'd love to have them at Arsenal. But what you've got to be able to do as an Arsenal fan is you've got to be able to differentiate between what your priorities are and what the club's priorities are. And you've got to understand that what you want as a supporter is not always going to be what they deliver, and vice versa. Rumble says you wanted Trossard sold, Harry. I still do. If a decent offer comes in, I would sell him because I think he becomes third in the pecking order on our left wing now. And so if someone offers money as he goes into the final year of his contract, I would take it. But that was always on the basis that we were going to go out and get another attacker in. If we don't bring another attacker in and we're only going to get 10, 15 million for Leandro Trossard, I would keep him for depth. But, as I say, that was my view and that was my opinion under the premise that we were going to go out and move for a third attacker. When I talked about the Madueke signing, many, many times I said, look, if you get Gyökeres, Madueke, and then one more, then I'm more okay with the fact that we spent money on Madueke. So I was always under the impression that we'd bring in that third attacker. Doesn't mean we're not, because Eze could be going elsewhere, and the same with Rodrigo. But who that attacker is going to be, I don't know. If that attacker is going to come in full stop, I don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We're all up in the air. But as I was just saying there, you've got to be able to differentiate between what you think is important and what the club think is important, because you're not always going to be completely aligned. With football fans, we all have different opinions, different views, right? I might say Eze is the answer. Someone else might say Rafael Leao is the answer, because we've got different preferences. Now, if we signed Eze and didn't sign Rafael Leao, there's going to be someone out there that's unhappy and says we should have signed Rafael Leao. Vice versa, I'm going to sit there and say we should have signed Eze. Football is a game of opinions. There are opinions everywhere, and you're never going to please everyone. So it's important as a fan that you're able to differentiate between what you want and what the club want. And you can be disappointed when you don't get what you want, right? Because that's human nature. But it doesn't mean that, nobody wants to win and the club's a joke and all the rest of it, okay? There's a middle ground somewhere that I wish people would just sometimes take up. Anyway, Rodrigo could be on his way to Manchester City, and that is obviously going to contribute to the frustrations among the Arsenal faithful going into the new season. But look, it was a pre-season game. It's not the be-all and end-all, but Saturday gave me some encouragement. It gave me some belief in what we already have, and I'm feeling a lot better about going into the new season. And let me tell you this, if we go and win at Old Trafford on the opening weekend, the transfer talk's going to die down pretty quickly. But obviously, we've got 2-3 weeks left. We really do feel like we could do with one more. The vast majority of us do anyway, and we'd like to see that happen. I'm starting to think it's unlikely, though. And that's just the hunch that I have. It's not based on any insider information. It's just a hunch that I have at the moment, given that the players that we've been really, really heavily linked with are seemingly headed elsewhere. Could it be that we come out with someone else, someone left field, someone that nobody really thought of? Yeah, it's possible. But yeah, let's see. I was talking about the positivity that you'll feel if we beat Man United. And Darryl says, if we lose against United, though, yeah, well, of course, like, football's a results business, right? And people, are going to react based on results. Football's always been like that. Okay, let's take another short pause. When we come back, we'll take a few of your questions to wrap up today's stream. Remember, if you haven't done so already, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and all the rest of it. And we'll be back in just a moment to take your questions. Start getting them in. Oh, man, there's some real negativity in the chat box, isn't there, today? My God. Is it like, answer me this question, right? Because I genuinely want to know the answer to this. Those of you in the chat saying things to the effect of, this club's a joke, season's over already, right? Even though the season hasn't even started. Have you been feeling like that all summer? Or is this something that has been triggered based on some of the reports that we've read this morning? Because, yes, Tottenham are in talks for Eze. Don't mean they're going to sign him. Man City are in talks for Rodrigo. Doesn't mean they're going to sign him. I mean, there's a good chance that both those clubs get those deals over the line, but the point is nothing is done yet. So is this reaction based off what you've read this morning? Or is it something that you felt consistently? Because I've got a lot more respect for people, even if I strongly disagree with them. And I've always said this, whether I agree with you or not, if it's a consistent opinion that you've held that you can back up, I at the very least respect it. I might not agree, but I respect it. Whereas if you're just jumping on a bandwagon, I don't really want to hear it. Steve Stone says, I was very interested in Madueke's second half display. His ability to cross better and earlier can only increase service to Gyökeres. Yeah, we talked about that quite a bit on yesterday's pod, the benefit of having a left-footed player on the left side. And obviously, conversely, that works on the other side as well. It's just something different to what we've been used to, isn't it? Aubadai says, when you hear reports that Arsenal are interested in a player, people naturally become interested. I wonder if the clubs send out this information or if people make it up. There's a lot of guesswork in this kind of industry. There's a lot of guesswork. There's a lot of people out there that will get whiff of something. And I agree that in most cases, there's no smoke without fire, in most cases. But people often get a whiff of something and then they jump the gun and they accelerate. And they'll say stuff like, they'll say stuff that's very vague. Okay. So, sometimes you hear these reports where they say, Arsenal admire X player. And then nothing for 9 months, 12 months. And then 12 months down the line, someone else will come out and say, Arsenal have opened talks over X player. And the person that originally said Arsenal admire, blah, 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 will then reshare that post and go, I told you this 12 months ago. People guess. People are very vague in their wording and deliberately use certain terms at times to be able to leave what they've originally said open for interpretation to the point where they can manipulate it later down the line and make themselves look like geniuses. And the amount of people on Twitter that pretend they are transfer experts, it drives me mad. There's some really good accounts out there, right? There's some really good aggregator accounts, which what they do is they pick up information reported by others and they share it. Fine, okay? Aggregating is one thing, reporting is something else. There's a lot of really, really good reporters. There's a lot of accounts that aren't traditional journalist accounts that have a track record of getting things right. And I've got immense respect for those people because clearly somewhere along the line, they've got an in and they've got an understanding of what's happening behind the scenes. But there's also a lot of nonsense accounts that just pop up in the transfer windows and start spouting all sorts. And the naivety of some people to the point where they literally take what those accounts are saying as gospel, then start thinking about it, then start going crazy about it, then start getting upset about it. It's mad. It is mad. JMD Video says, have you got a fantasy football league? We do have a Chronicles of Aguna league. I don't have the code to hand. I need to make my team, if not today, tomorrow. And then I'll share that with you guys in the chat box. And we can have a good old competition. We'll give a prize to the winner as well at the end of the season. If people remind me, because I always give up on on fantasy football like 4 or 5 weeks in when I inevitably forget to do my team 1 week and get the hump. Andrew says, Harry, do you think that striker and left winger were the clear positions that needed upgrading at the end of last season? In this regard, the window hasn't been a successful one without a quality left winger. See, that's a nice constructive question. And it addresses the issues and the frustrations that a lot of people are feeling in a respectful way. Love that, Andrew. For me, they were two really, really important positions. I kept saying in the lead up to the summer that midfield was massive as well. I felt that was being overlooked because there was always a chance that Partey was going to leave. There was always a real confidence that Jorginho was going. So I always felt like the midfield needed addressing. But I guess the reason that wasn't talked about a lot or as much as the forward positions was because we knew from sort of January, didn't we, that we were in a position to sign Martin Zubimendi, I suppose. But for me, those were the two positions in attack that needed rectifying. Noni Madueke, I guess, addresses the left wing issue, but isn't a natural left winger. And so for that reason, when I say natural, I mean he's not someone that's made his career as a left winger. He's been predominantly playing on the right side. He is naturally left-sided in terms of his preferred foot. But I think, when you're linked with Eze and you're linked with Rodrigo and then you get Madueke, you can understand why people are going to look at that and go, Now, it might turn out to be a masterstroke, but you can't blame people for having their doubts and concerns. Then you think about sort of what Mikel Arteta said about Madueke being a kind of two-sided winger. I asked him the question after the Villarreal game, and it was very much, he's going to play on both sides. And you start to understand, that actually maybe the left winger position hasn't been addressed fully. I guess the pushback and the argument will be, well, Martinelli's still there and Trossard is still there. So does it need, a sort of complete overhaul, or do we just need to provide another option on that side to give us something a little bit different? And, each to their own in terms of their opinions on whether that's going to work or not. But I think for me, in the attacking area, those were two positions that needed to be addressed. And I feel like we've addressed one. We've gone out and got the best option that we could, I thought, in Victor Gyökeres without having our pants pulled down. And then the other position, the left wing position, I feel like we've half fixed it, but not fully. And that's why I've been of the opinion and of the view that we will go out and get another attacker. Starting to feel a little bit less confident about that, though, in recent days. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. I'm going to take one more, and then I'm going to leave it there. Guys, you don't need to put the same comments into the chat 57 million times. Ayomide says, this reaction is a consistent opinion I've felt since the January transfer window. Our gaps were visible. Get a 9, get a 10, a left winger, and the others are supplementary. That Madueke's deal has just offset everything. Well, no, I don't agree with the 10 thing, because we knew that Ethan Nwaneri was going to kick on and develop, and I really like him, and I want him to push forward. If, like, let's say that Eze couldn't play from the left, I wouldn't be interested. I'm only interested in Eze because he can play left and centrally. But you take out the left-sided element, I'm not as fussed, because that is the position of priority. We've got Odegaard, we've got Nwaneri, we've got Havertz, we've got Max Dowman coming through. The 10 position doesn't really worry me much. We needed a 9 and we needed a left winger. We've half signed the left winger in Noni Madueke. And bringing Eze in as well would have resolved the other half of that, because we'd have had another player that can play on the left wing that is better than what we currently have, in my opinion. And therefore, those two combined, Eze and Madueke, would have given us extra cover in the middle, but also, sort of addressed that left-sided problem, whilst also providing more backup to Bukayo Saka. So that felt like a good combination in terms of addressing the issues that we have. Jack says, Harry, the frustration for me is that we're so close, yet we never do quite enough to address our issues. We need a top-class left winger, plus other teams are moving extremely well this summer, which is worrying. I do think that, how do I word this? I do think that you should be careful about going overboard on transfer windows, because we've seen so many examples over the years of where clubs have had what are perceived to be really good transfer windows and then completely flopped. I know we've seen it with like West Ham in the past a lot. We've seen it with Chelsea at times. We've seen it with Everton over the years, where they've bought a few players in and you've gone, that's interesting, and then they've been crap. We've seen it with Liverpool last year. I mean, how many people predicted Liverpool would win the title last year? Many people looked at them and went, Arne Slot's come in, they've lost Jurgen Klopp, and they've made one signing in Chiesa, and that's it. They've done nowhere near enough. They're definitely going to tank, and then they go and win the league. So I do like it when the window shuts, because it means you can base your opinions and you can assess your team's chances based on the football you're watching, and not just the kind of transfer element of it all, because during the transfer window, that inevitably takes over in terms of people's mindsets and thoughts about certain players and how good their team is and how well positioned they are. The transfer window dominates everything during this period of the year, and I hate it. I hate it. But anyway, we're going to leave it there. That's enough moaning for today. Listen, just to kind of summarize from me, right? I have to question how interested Arsenal actually are in Eberechi Eze, if, as is being reported, we've not made that official sort of approach and we're giving Tottenham a free run to the player. Well, you have to question how serious Arsenal's interest is in him for them to allow that to happen. It might not be what you want to hear or what I want to hear, because I really, really like the player. But if Eberechi Eze genuinely had the option of joining Arsenal or Tottenham, where's he going? It's not even a debate. He's not going to get more money at Tottenham than he would get at Arsenal. It's not like one's a London club and one's not. It's not like one's in the Champions League and one's not. Like, it's an easy choice to make if both clubs are legitimately in for you. Tottenham seem to be legitimately in for Eberechi Eze. Arsenal, who we've been saying for a few days now, by the way, don't seem to be as hot on this as maybe was first believed. That's the only explanation for this. So as much as I'm disappointed because I really want to see the player join Arsenal, and it doesn't look like it's heading that way, I'm not going to have a meltdown because clearly this isn't the case of Arsenal and Tottenham going head to head and them coming out on top. It's clearly because Arsenal's priorities and what Arsenal are willing to do doesn't quite align with mine or some of the rest of the supporters right now. That's the actual thing here. Rodrigo going to Man City. I really like Rodrigo, but I also recognize it was going to be a crazy deal to do financially. Man City will be able to do it financially because they've got Jack Grealish off their books with a £50 million option to buy at the end of that contract, which will be turning 30 years old during, by the way. And then they're going to sell Savinho for north of 50 million quid. We aren't able to sell Martinelli or Trossard for that kind of money because there isn't that interest in them. And therefore, the Rodrigo deal fell out of reach. Like, I made my peace with the Rodrigo thing ages ago, so I don't want to keep going on about that one. But just in terms of summarizing, I thought I'd mention it again. There are players that are going to depart Arsenal. Will we get major money for any of them? I highly, highly doubt it. But I think as a club, if we really, really wanted Eberechi Eze, we should be able to back ourselves in terms of negotiating those exits and raise the money, which I know we're capable of, to go and get a deal like the Eberechi Eze deal done. The fact that we're not doing that, the fact that Tottenham are being allowed into the equation, it says one of two things. Either Arsenal have been really relaxed and this is going to kick them into gear, and now you might hear over the course of the next week that Arsenal really kind of ramp up their interest in the player, or Arsenal were never that interested in the first place. You got to take a chill pill and see how this pans out over the course of the next week or so, I would say. And we keep hearing about this release clause. Fabrizio Romano says it's expired. Ed Aaron says it expires on Friday. We don't know. Let's sit tight. Let's focus on being the best version ourselves going into the new season. And we'll see what happens between now and the end of the window. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Really, really appreciate it. Appreciate the love and support. We've got some season predictions coming out to you guys very, very, very soon. And there is a Patreon piece coming out later as well. I know I've said that over the last couple of days. Basically, as a lot of you know, my wife is due to give birth anytime now within the next few weeks. And the plan was to sit and record yesterday, but we had a bit of a false alarm. We thought the baby was coming. It was a false alarm in the end. But I've got quite a bit going on at home. So if the schedule is a little bit all over the place, I've also got two very young children as well on summer holidays that I'm trying to keep occupied in between all the work and stuff. So I apologize that the schedule's been a bit all over the place, but there is a Patreon piece coming out to you later today, and we've got our predictions coming out very, very soon as well. So yeah, not quite got baby Simeon number 3 yet, but it could happen at any point. So if I ghost, if I disappear, if I'm missing a show or whatever, that's probably the reason why. So yeah. Anyway, I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. Until the next one, take care. Goodbye.